Awesome. Thank you, Randy. All right, I will go ahead and get us started. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we have a bit more information to go over today than I was expecting when I first set this webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're not familiar with me, I am the Community Programs Manager for CSBG. Both the annual report and the state plan fall under my purview. So this is my main wheelhouse for CSBG, and why you'll be hearing only from me today rather than from monitoring or anyone else on the CSBG team. So the goal of today is simply for me to share information. I don't even want to call this a training. This is me just to share information that I've received from OCS in the last couple of months, and also to give some context for you all. I reviewed your 2019 submissions for the Module 3 section of the annual report, and I'll be sending you my comments by early next week. And so I want to give you guys some information and context for those comments. So the way the next hour is going to go is I just want to go over very quickly what we know up until this point about Module 3 and community initiatives. And then I'll go into detail on the February 2020 Dear Colleague letter that we received that provided a lot more information about how community initiatives and Module 3 is going to work moving forward. After that, I'll go a little bit into the review comments that we received from OCS from your 2018 submissions, and then some comments from my review on your 2019 submissions, and then finally next steps. So what we know so far prior to that Dear Colleague letter, I do want to start with laying the foundation that community initiatives, community level work, and all that jazz, it's not new to CSBG. There has always been language about addressing poverty at community levels in the acts associated with CSBG. First, the Economic Opportunity Act in the 60s, followed by the CSBG Act in the 80s, and then its most recent reauthorization in 98. So it's always been a part of the work that we're doing. Some agencies have been doing community level work this entire time. It's just that the reporting that has been set up, or the way it's been set up, it hasn't been able to accurately capture a lot of that community level work. Most of our reporting focuses on the number of individuals that you're serving, the number of actions that you're taking, but it's not really looking at the changes that are happening at the community level. So with that in mind, in 2016, OCS got permission to include a new section in the new CSBG annual report. It was formerly the IS report that will focus specifically on community level work. And so in 2018, that was the first year that that section of the report was implemented. We now know it as Module 3. I'll probably refer to it mostly as Module 3. That's the shortest name for all this. So last year, what you turned in early February, March, April, that was the first time that we had fully implemented that part of the reporting for CSBG. And I do want to point out here that it was always recognized, if not maybe stated very well, that the first year or years of Module 3 were never expected to go smoothly. It was always the expectation that tweaks will need to be made to the resources being provided and even the requirements involved with Module 3 based on implementation experience, based on what people are experiencing in the first year or two. So before I get into the tweaks that are happening this year for 2019, I did want to throw out the definition that we have been working off of from that first round of submissions. This is the definition that NASCAS was sharing and that OCS was sharing. And I wanted to highlight what I always thought was the most important part of the definition of what a community level initiative is. And it's about changing the conditions and environment where households of low incomes live and work. It's not just looking at the number of people that you're serving, the number of things that you're doing, but it's how are you actually changing your community, changing the conditions of the community or its environment. So I wanted to have you keep that in mind, because it was with that definition that we submitted our 2018 Module 3s. We submitted those, the final submission was in April, the end of April of last year. A couple of weeks we finally got comments on those submissions. Ask me why it took so long. I don't know. We might never know. But along with those comments that we received for each submission, OCS did post a Dear Colleague letter that gave some initial changes or specifications to this work. So within that Dear Colleague letter, they have included a new definition and parameters for what we're reporting in Module 3. They've extended the quality assurance year. Last year was a quality assurance year. That was just them acknowledging that they're giving us initial instructions, we're turning in our initial submissions, and then we might have to change some things based on those submissions since it's the first year. They're extending that. Basically, I take that to mean as we're still figuring all of this out. And so that's part of the reason why right now some of you are working on updates to your 2018 Module 2 and Module 4 information, but no one is working on updates to your 2018 Module 3 information. They do not want those resubmitted as a quality assurance year. It was just a year to figure this out, and going into 2019 or 2019 reporting, that's been extended. So I just take that to mean as we're still figuring this out. And finally, they are putting an extra emphasis on the fact that they recognize that there are phases to community level work. And they don't want reporting for all phases. There are actually only a couple of phases where they're going to want work sent or modules sent to OCS, an extra phase that the state will need to collect, and then a phase where you don't submit anything. But before we get too much into that, I'm going to throw out the new definition that we are now working with for community initiatives. And actually, there's a new name. They are no longer referring to this as community initiatives. They're referring to them as community level transformations. Now, I personally will probably still refer to them as a community level initiative here and there, but I appreciate the new word transformation because I think it adds extra emphasis to the idea of change, that this work is all about change that you are making at that level. But I do appreciate that. I don't want to read the definition. You all can read this, and these slides will be made available after this webinar, so you can refer back to this easily in the future. But I did underline I think key terms in here. It seems like they are doubling down on the idea that when we're thinking about community level transformations in Module 3, the problems and the solutions that we are outlining in that report, they really need to be measurable and clearly defined. Both of those terms are cited twice within this one definition. So keep in mind with the comments that I send back to you, both from OCS and from myself, and keep that in mind as you work on updates to your 2019 Module 3 information. So moving forward with the phases. So now that we are thinking about this as a community level transformation, we need to think about the phases of this work and when we need to send in reporting information. Now, phase 1 is when is considered the formative phase. This is when you are still figuring stuff out. This is when you recognize that there's a problem in your community, a problem that you want to address. Maybe you haven't clearly defined it yet, or maybe you've defined it, but you're still working out how exactly you want to address that particular problem. You're still figuring out the relationships that you need to form, the partnerships that you need to form to address that particular problem. You're really just in that brainstorming part of this work. You're maybe looking at your community needs assessment or even doing a new community needs assessment. You're gathering information and you're looking for resources that can support your work on this problem. It's at this stage that you do not send in any reporting for Module 3. I think for 2019, I don't think that that I collected anything that I would consider to be in this phase. I do think last year, though, there might have been a couple that were considered to be in this phase, especially anything where your report was around forming a coalition and it started and ended with that. That's great work. I'm not putting that down by any means, but that is usually kind of the first step to community level change or community level transformation. So just keep that in mind when looking forward. Again, I don't think we're dealing with this year, But if you are starting to do this right now with any particular issue in your community, you can maybe start to think of that as being in the formative phase when it comes to Module 3 and the annual report. Okay, so the next phase is the formal planning stage. This is when you and your partners have agreed upon the problem that you are going to solve. You've clearly defined it, the cause or condition of poverty, and you're committing to addressing that problem. You've committed staff time to addressing that. You're maybe looking for other resources, other funding or other tools you can bring in to address this problem, but at the very least, you've committed staff time to addressing this problem. Once you have that clearly defined problem and your goal to address that problem, you need both. They both need to be clearly defined. They both need to be measurable. And then as soon as you have a commitment with your partners to address that problem, to achieve that goal, that's when you're going to want to submit your Module 3 for this work to IHCDA. You might not have your action plan completely laid out yet. You might still be figuring out the strategies that you want to take to address this problem. But as soon as you have got the problem identified and defined, as soon as you've got a goal that will address that problem defined, and you have committed with partners to address all that, you'll submit that Module 3 for review. OCS does not want phase 2 submissions with the annual report. I'll go into in a couple of slides how you'll submit this to IHCDA, but just to let you know that at this point you will need to fill out the first couple of steps on your Module 3, and you'll need to submit that to IHCDA for review. Now, the next phase is active implementation phase. This is when you've actually started to put into action the things that you've been talking about in the last few phases. You still have your clearly defined problem, you have your clearly defined goal, but at this point you've also established metrics or performance indicators. You've committed your initial resources, both staff time and maybe additional funding or other tools or resources in your community. And the big thing is that you identified the roles of each partner. That's not just, hey, me and these two other organizations are going to work together on this, but you can clearly identify, who's taking lead on this issue, or whose staff is going to be taking lead on this issue, and whose staff is maybe going to be support, or maybe two organizations are taking lead and one organization is providing research assistance or funding assistance. Everything has been clearly identified. You might still be looking for additional resources. You might still be maybe looking at other partners, but at the very least, you've got this base foundation laid out and you are ready to pull the trigger on implementation. It's at this point that OCS actually wants this submitted to them. They want, again, you have your problem that is measurable and really defined. You have a goal that is measurable and really defined. You have your strategies identified for how you're going to achieve that goal, and you have your roles identified for everyone that's involved in this initiative. At this point, you might not have outcomes yet. You might, be a year out or maybe even 2 from having those outcomes, but as long as the foundation is there where you can actually start implementing and collecting those outcomes, that's what you're going to want to fill in. I think it'd probably be questions 1 through 12 module 4. All of those will need to be filled in at this point and submitted to IHCDA. I will review and then potentially submit it to OCS as a part of the annual report. And as soon as it's submitted to OCS as part of the annual report, it's recognized as being in the active implementation phase. It will continue to be in that phase until it reaches maturity, until it gets to that final year and you have hopefully met your goal, or you're maybe just sunsetting the initiative without meeting the goal. But during that time period, you're still submitting this module every year. You're providing updates on outcomes, any changes you've had to make for anything, and you're submitting that to me, and I'm submitting that to OCS while it's in active implementation phase. Now, the last phase is maturity phase. This is when, hopefully, normally, when you have finished your initiative and you have achieved the transformation that you sought out to achieve from the beginning. You've reached your ultimate goal. You've achieved it with partners. They've got some good examples. This is pulled from the Dear Colleague letter. You know, if your goal was to build affordable housing units because you had a shortage in your community of like 200, and so you set out to build 60 in 5 years, and saying like 5 years you've built 60, awesome. You've achieved your goal. Your community initiative is complete, and you're now focused on how many individuals you're serving with those units. And it's at that point that this becomes more focused as a Module 4 initiative. Same like where if your goal was creating new jobs in the next 3 years for your community. As soon as you reach that goal, it's reached the maturity phase. You set that as your final submission. And then moving forward, it would switch to a Module 4 submission. So again, as soon as you have reached whatever goal you set out, that's where you've reached maturity phase. So that's why it's really important when you're looking at your problem identification and your goal agenda sections on the annual report, the module questions. That's why it's so important that those need to be clearly defined and measurable, because you need to be able to identify when you've achieved them and when you're actually hitting this phase. If you are looking at your Module 3 and you're not sure when you might hit that maturity phase, you don't know when to stop and take measure and to check when you know whether or not you've hit your goal when you're supposed to, that's a problem, and you're probably going to get comments on that, either from me or for OCS or from both. So that's if you've reached your goal. Now, if you don't reach your goal, maybe you have ended the initiative early because funding was cut, or maybe their needs in the community have changed drastically, a la maybe COVID-19. That's fine. That's a perfectly okay thing to do. We recognize that that's going to happen, but you're still going to need to submit a Module 3 for that final year. Whenever you decided to make that switch to end the initiative because certain things have changed in your community or for your organization, you'll still need to submit a Module 3. To pay extra attention to that last question where it asks about lessons learned, and that's where you're going to want to put a lot of information into why the initiative ended early, why it wasn't able to reach its goal. Again, it's not always a bad thing. I mean, it can be a sad thing if you don't reach your goal, but if needs in the community have changed, then we need to recognize that and move to address those needs. Or funding is reduced. I mean, sometimes there's just nothing you can do about that. So we recognize that, and we just want to make sure that that's clearly defined. And if there's anything that could be learned for future initiatives, that is set out so that both you and any other agencies that could learn from your experience can learn from that. And then they do put a note in the Dear Colleague letter that it could be you end your initiative because community needs have changed and you want to maybe retool the initiative to meet those needs. If the problem changes and the goal agenda changes so much so because you needs have changed in the area that much, that's fine, but they would consider that a whole new module, a whole new transformation. So at that, you would basically be starting from phase 1 or phase 2, where you are identifying a new problem, you're setting a new goal agenda, and you're identifying some new strategies to address that, and you'd be starting the process all over again. You wouldn't necessarily continue with the same module initiative. The name should change. It shouldn't be the same name or the same goal agenda. So it would basically just be a whole new Module 3 moving forward. So again, I did want to put extra emphasis that as soon as you have reached your goal, that final year where you can put in outcomes to report or impacted outcomes, and you're looking at the NPIs, and they all show that you've reached your goal. You set out to lower a percentage by 10% or to add 20 units of something to your community, and then you've done the thing. Awesome, amazing. You put that down into your report, you do a little celebration, we do a little dance, and then next year, do not resubmit that initiative. Even if the the thing is still working. You build units and they're still housing people. Or you built a community garden and it's still being used by your community, or you started a new service and it's still serving people. That's great, awesome. It still doesn't fit as a module 3. The transformation, the change has happened, and now the focus is on keeping up outcomes. The focus is on serving individuals and families. And so at that point, it would switch to being reported in module 2 or module 4 moving forward. I think that's really important because I think of probably a fourth, maybe even a third of our submissions for module 3 are around affordable housing and building affordable housing units, which is awesome. Definitely a big need in a lot of our communities. But all of you will probably see in the comments from me, if not from OCS, that as soon as those units are built and as soon as the units are provided to individuals and they're leased up, then I would consider that community initiative complete. Your goal was achieved. Your goal is to build 40 new units. You've built 40 new units. They are now available to your community. Initiative was a success, and then moving forward it will switch to being reported in module 4 and looking at the number of individuals that you are serving with that. And then again, even if you aren't able to hit your goal for module 3, if you set out to do something and for whatever reason it doesn't work out, please make sure to submit that final module 3. Don't just leave it off. Hey, it's not going on currently. It was going on earlier this year, but it ended. It's not happening right now. So I don't want to submit a report either because it looks bad or because I don't have time or it just doesn't seem important anymore. It is still important. It's really important that we identify what happened and why, again, so that you can learn from that, so that I can learn from that, so that our network can learn from that, and also so that OCS can learn from that. Maybe there's something within the program that is an issue that is keeping certain initiatives from being a success. So that's why it's really important to capture that information and share that so that we can all learn from it. So what does this mean for us moving forward? So thinking about our 2020 annual report, I'll get to what's happening with 2020 and 2019 in the next few slides, but looking forward, as long as we don't have any major hiccups with OCS review or more pandemics, assuming that the timelines are going to go back to the way that they were, remember that you don't submit anything if you are in that formative phase, that phase 1. Once you get into the formal planning stage and you've identified a clearly defined problem and you are thinking about goals and strategies, that's when you're going to start to pull together module 3 and you'll submit it as a phase 2 or submit it as phase 3 and 4. Phase 2 through 4, you're going to submit to IHCDA, and then we will submit phases 3 and 4 to OCS. And how it's going to look when thinking about maybe as in a calendar, it actually works out pretty well for us given that we follow the calendar year and not the federal fiscal year. So in September, just like this last year in September, right now, the plan is to release the template for the community action plan. So this would be for the 2021 community action plan. Just like we did last year, the community action plan looking forward will ask for some materials that look back. So when I release a 2021 community action plan, I will ask for some 2020 materials, including your module 3. Now this last year, when I asked for module 3, I asked for some information that was from the previous year, and then also some information about what you plan to do in this coming year. So it's a little bit different than what you would submit as part of the annual report. I'm not going to do that this year. This is strictly going to be, if you had to submit 2020, your annual report in November, submit that module 3 that you would submit in that instance. So you'll submit your module 3 as if you were submitting for your annual report in November, along with the rest of your community action plan. We'll do an initial review and provide comments by hopefully early December. And then we'll take December and maybe even January to finalize everything and get it to the point where you feel comfortable with it as a community initiative. I feel comfortable with it as a community initiative or transformation. Now that's the new term. And we feel ready to submit it to OCS. We might submit it to NASCAS for their review. That is something I plan to do this year for sure. After this year, after the next month or two. I don't know if that's going to be a regular thing, but I hope to have everything done in January so that we can spend February and March really focusing on modules 2 and 4. And this also follows the recommendation by OCS. They have recommended that given that the state should be collecting phase 2, but not ending it on, they have recommended that we collect everything a little bit earlier than we normally would for the annual report. So it really works out well for us, I think, that we are following the calendar year and the way that our community action plans fall with scheduling. All right, so moving forward, I do see I've got a couple of questions, and I'm going a little bit faster than I expected. So I'll take a second to answer questions. Okay, it looks like there were some audio issues, and I did get a message from GoToWebinar. If there's an audio issue that's an extended period of time, hopefully it was still caught by the recording. I will also make this recording available. Hopefully by the end of this week or early next week, I'll post it to our website so that you can access this if you missed anything because of audio issues. And then also if you want to share this with any staff that couldn't be on today, they will be able to review it as well. All right, so once we got the Dear Colleague letter in February, I think about a week later, we got some comments on the 2018 submissions. Now, again, you don't have to redo anything for 2018 for Module 3. This is the quality assurance year. This is the year we're still figuring everything out. So this was simply, really, it's a tool that will help us do even better for 2019. And it's going to help us determine which things to resubmit, because that was some of the comments that they gave us were about things that we should not submit. But total, we submitted 26 Module 3 forms. Out of those 26, we had 4 that had no comments. There was no issue that they found, and they simply asked us to resubmit those Module 3s. Awesome. There's one initiative that they recognize as being incomplete. And while they accepted that this year, I think they even said last year when they were collecting everything, it's fine if it's incomplete. Moving forward, that will no longer be the case. You're going to need to have, I think it's at least questions 1 through 10, if not 1 through 12, complete in order to submit this to OCS. If there are any questions before, like question 2, 4, 7, and those that are not complete in some way, I will not be submitting to OCS. So keep that in mind moving forward. 4 of the initiatives were asked not to resubmit. Now, they did not provide any comments on why on the paper. At the conference in February, where they were giving some information about this, they said it was for the most part because they considered what was submitted to be in the maturity phase. They considered it to be ended as a community transformation. Now, again, that particular initiative, that particular program or service might continue, but the focus has now changed to number of individuals that are being served. And so they consider that to be a better fit for Module 4. Now, there may have been some where they just really did not think that it was a community initiative, but they didn't come out and say that. I don't think for anyone. They just simply asked that they not resubmit those modules. And then the remaining 17 are kind of, we still don't really know. They need more information. There are comments on each of those 17 that we need to address if they're being resubmitted for 2019. Now, there was a total of 54 comments for those 17 submissions. At least 21 of them were related to problem identification. So if you notice, we had 17 that modules that had comments, 21 comments on problem identification. So yes, that means some initiatives had more than one comment on the problem identification. I don't know if that was because OCS had multiple people reviewing, or if they really wanted to separate out the different issues they were identifying, but I thought that was interesting. Almost half of our comments relate to the second or third question in the module. They were split, I think, pretty evenly between not having a community level need being clearly stated, or having data that doesn't support a community level need. So this means that the need might be agency focused. Maybe you submitted something that was about how your agency doesn't have the capacity to do something. Again, important thing, that's something that should be reporting on, but that's not module 3 community level need, something that should be included in this part of the report. That should maybe be on module 2. Data that doesn't support community level need, if you included data that was about, that included like number of individuals that were in need of something, like 200 individuals were homeless in this particular neighborhood, that just including individuals, just including a number when it as relates to human beings, to clients, makes it seem like it might be an individual family level need. So be very mindful of that when you are identifying the problem that you are addressing with your module. I think another thing that I saw commonly is that the need would be stated, but there wasn't any data. Maybe some had data that wasn't community level necessarily, but quite a few just didn't have any data. It was housing is a need in our community, or this particular county has high recidivism rates, or this particular county has low graduation rates. That's a good need, but we really need to have data that supports that particular statement. So keep that in mind. And then with the goal agenda, again, more detail is needed. If I think a lot of submissions included statements like, we want to increase graduation rates, we want to increase affordable housing, we want to decrease crime. Great, that's a great goal, but it's missing some detail. So we're really going to need, again, very specific, defined, measurable goals. And I would say in most cases, they should speak directly to the problem that you identified. So if you identified that eviction rates are high in your community, that it's 30% of renters get evicted at some point compared to 15% in the state, then your goal should be something like, we want to lower eviction rates down to 18% in the next 5 years. If your problem identified was that only 85% of high school students graduate compared to 92% of the state, then your goal should be something like, we want to raise graduation rates up to 92 or 95 or something in the next 6 years. Those are all very clearly defined, they're all clearly measurable, and they speak to each other. I think that was maybe one of the top things that were missed, even when data was provided for problem identification and a goal that is measurable and defined is provided. They don't speak to each other. If they don't match up, that's a problem. And then again, if you only include information about individuals being served, we want to have a graduating class of 20 kids in this next year. We want to serve 100 meals in the next year. We want to provide 20 loans in the next 2 years. All great goals, but all individual or family focused. So yeah, make sure that you are thinking about this at the community level. And then the third most common comment from OCS was about the expected duration being inappropriate or not correct. And that was mostly because we had several initiatives that had either NA or ongoing or indefinite as the expected duration. And that is not okay. If that is the case for the particular service or initiative or program that you are reporting on, again, not a bad thing, but that most likely means that this is just a general service that you are providing and that it fits better with the module 4. Community transformation really needs to have a start and an end date, and an end date when you are looking to check to see if you've actually reached your goal. You can't set a goal of lowering or raising a percentage or adding a number of assets to your community, but not have an end date of when you want to accomplish that by. That's just not going to fly anymore. So make sure that you have a set duration. They are usually in years. I think some modules had like 3 or 4 sentences providing an in-depth explanation on how the duration of the program will work. Really, we just need a year. We need to say that this is going to end in 6 years, this will end in 3 years, this will end in 8 years, however long, usually 7 years or less. That is what is need to be provided for that expected duration section. I see I've got a question. Oh, still some audio issues. Okay, sorry about that if you're experiencing those audio issues. Could be my Wi-Fi has been going in and out the last couple of days. Hopefully it sticks with us. All right, so the next couple of slides are my comments on your 2019 submission. So I do want to preface all of this. When you receive the comments from OCS, we're going to go ahead and share the comments that they sent out for the modules. If you receive those comments and you have already submitted that same initiative for 2019, it could be that you have already addressed that comment. So keep that in mind. Don't look at a long list of comments if you receive that and think, oh shoot, I've got a lot to still do with this initiative. It could be that you've already solved that with your most recent submission. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind that maybe you didn't. And I would say there were quite a few that still had the same issues from last year. So just be very critical when you're looking at those comments from OCS and from myself to make sure that to see whether or not the comments still apply. I'll also add, when I send the comments from OCS and when I send my comments on your 2019 submissions, I'm also going to be including any comments that I provided on your 2019 community action plan. Now, everyone, when you turned in your community action plan, you received a letter, either a required action letter where you needed to update some things in your community action plan, or an acceptance letter stating that you turned in everything you were supposed to, it looks great, we've accepted it. No matter what you got, at the end of that letter, there was some language about strategic plans, because we saw that was a need across the network. Some updates needed to be had to strategic plans and to strategic scorecards. And then after that section were some comments on the community initiative that you submitted. Didn't require that you make any updates based on those comments, but I did ask that you take them into consideration when you submitted your 2019 annual report modules. I think some did, which is great, thank you. It seems like maybe some didn't, so I went ahead, I'm going to be sending those comments back to you, no matter what. So again, it could be that you addressed those comments, great. It could be that you didn't. And so some of my comments from 2019 submissions for your annual report might just reference back to those community action plan notes. So hopefully it should be very clear when you get those comments back. I want to explain the format that you'll see them in. So again, common issues that I saw with the 2019 submissions. Again, problem identification continues to be an issue. And I would say this is an issue across the nation. This is something that OCS and NASCAS have identified as something that everyone is struggling with, both the problem identification and the goal agenda. And these are both probably the two most important sections of the module. If you can get these right, the rest of the module and the rest of the reporting is going to go a lot easier. It's going to be a lot more likely that you'll get the rest of it right if you can get these first two sections correct. So that's why we're putting a lot of focus on these first two sections. So again, make sure that you have a measurable community level need. Now that's normally going to be like a rate of change, that your graduation rates are too low, that your opioid tests the rates of opioid deaths are too high, that people that are housing burdened, that there's the percentage of people that are housing burdened is too high. It's either going to be that, or it's going to be that your community is being assets, that you have too few housing units, affordable housing units, that you have too few affordable transportation options, too few healthcare options. Make sure again that it's measurable, that you don't just say housing is an issue in our area, that you actually explain what that issue is, that it's measurable, and that's set for the community level. My tip is that you, and why I've been including some of this in my off the top of my head examples, is you include what the surrounding area is or what the state rates are. I think that can help show why this is a community level need. That was a comment that I saw from OCS in a couple of times, that even if you provided a rate, that our graduation rates are too low, but you just gave that percentage, they might have come back and said, well, how do you know this is a community need, that this is a community problem? And when I asked for clarification on that, the response I got back was that they just need a little bit more detail to show why it's a problem, that if you can show that it's higher or lower than the surrounding area or than the state, then that can help show why it's a problem. That your graduation rate is 85% of students, of high school students, compared to 96% of the state. Well, okay, then yeah, that's a pretty big problem. There's an issue going on there in that community that you can maybe address. I would also advise or encourage you to include that information, because then if you get to the end of your initiative and you didn't reach your goal for whatever reason, it could be that the reason there's something big going on in your area or big going on in the state that affects that issue. But if you can show that maybe you didn't reach your goal, maybe things stayed the same in the 5 years of your initiative, but they got worse around you or they got worse in the state, I would say that still shows your initiative was very successful. And that is a really important thing to know in the lessons learned part, but I think that's kind of a good backup. If things don't go the way that you want them to or think that they should, it's helpful to look at things in the wider context and see if you can figure out the reasons why from that. Another quick tip, please include the name and year of your source. If you include data in your problem identification, which you need to, and a lot of you did, which is great, please make sure that you cite where that data is from. If it's from your 2018 Community Needs Assessment, state that. If it's from your 2017 point in time count, state that. That's really important. The problem identification is giving you your baseline data, but we really need to know where that data came from. We need to ensure that it remains your baseline data. Because we can't have it change year to year. That's something that I noticed this year. A couple of submissions, baseline data changed, or the data and the problem identification changed to reflect 2019 numbers, even if this was like year 3 or year 4 of the initiative. And that really shouldn't happen. Whenever your initiative started, whatever data you used to show that it was a problem at that point, that's the data that you should use throughout as your baseline data. So for the most part, your problem identification should not change year to year, especially when it comes to the data that you're using. And then you might want to add a little bit of detail. This was something that I saw for those that had only maybe 1 sentence or 2 sentences and their problem identification. OCS had some comments on basically additional detail needed. So I would encourage you to include some detail on why you chose this as a problem that you want to tackle. Again, it's going to the question on why is this a community need, why it's a community problem that is worth addressing, why it's worth your time. Address that, answer those questions, because that's something that OCS, it seems, has some questions about sometimes. Okay, when it comes to your goal agenda, again, make sure it's measurable, clearly defined, and that it directly addresses the problem that you identified. And then if you can, I would encourage you to add interim goals, either for each year that your initiative is going to take place or for each strategy. So if your initiative is to increase graduation rates from 85% to 95% in the next 5 years, so maybe your goal is then to increase graduation rates by 2% every year. Go ahead and state that. Or if you're going to be doing multiple things to address that, you're going to be providing a new coach at high school, and you're going to be expanding an after-school service at one of your partners, and you're going to be giving out school supplies or laptops to seniors. You're going to be doing multiple things. Lay that out as a part of your goal agenda. Make sure first and foremost that you have your overall goal clearly identified, preferably near the top of your narrative, but you have them, include any interim goals or sub goals within that narrative. I think I've touched on this, but really make sure that your goal is focused on a rate of change or adding a new community asset, not on serving individuals or families. And I think you can kind of see the need for this when you look at the NPIs that are listed on the form. If you click to those tabs, they are separated. The top NPIs for each domain is usually about adding a new thing, adding new housing, adding a new educational resource, adding things to the community, maybe taking some things out, but for the most part, adding a thing that wasn't there before. And then if you scroll to the bottom, the NPIs there are about rates of change, about increasing graduation rates, decreasing rates of alcohol usage, decreasing percents of opioid deaths. Those are the goals that you should be focusing on. Again, if your goal is about serving 200 individuals or serving 50 families, that's great, but that belongs on module 4. And then again, if you have them, add details about the goal and sub-goals that you want to achieve. So try to keep your narrative to more than a sentence. I think we had 1 or 2 initiatives that only had like 1 sentence, and OCS did ask for additional details on those modules, but try to also keep it less than 3 paragraphs. That was something that OCS has said verbally to us, that they, I think, got 800 or 900 submissions for 2018. So reading novels for each of those submissions is not really something that they have the capacity to do. So try to keep it to just a paragraph or 2 narrative. Okay. And then duration, again, that would seem to be another issue for this year. Make sure that you have a set end date and set number of years. Don't provide anything as ongoing or indefinite. That belongs on module 4. And I wanted to throw out here, like I mentioned, building affordable housing units does seem to be a very common community initiative that we're reporting on, which is great. Big need in our state, but just note that whenever your units are completed and leased up, that's when your module is going to be in the maturity, or that's when your initiative will be in the maturity phase. And as soon as you submit that final submission where the units are available, people are being served, it's going to switch to module 4. And that goes the same for any community gardens. If you've built your community garden and now it's just running or maybe going through improvements, I would say that that's probably moved from module 3 to module 4. If you started a new service and it went through a pilot period and now it's going to become a regular service that your agency provides, once it becomes that regular service, it's going to become a module 4 report. And again, anything else where you're adding a new thing that isn't a rate of change, as soon as you've added that thing, you've reached your goal, you're going to want to move that to module 4. And then one thing that I heard from NASCAS, this will be coming out as guidance, hopefully in the next couple of months, but they're not making it official yet, is when you have a multi-year initiative, it's really important that you have your overall goals set in the goal agenda. I think that's question 4 on the module. And then when you are looking at your outcomes or indicators to report on the NPI tabs, you're going to list your yearly goals on that. Don't submit your overall goal each and every year on those NPI tabs. So if your overall goal is to increase graduation rates by 10% in the next 5 years, and you're going to want to increase, you're going to take that as 2% chunks. Year 1, you're going to go from 85 to 87%. You're going to go from 87 to 89%. When you are submitting those yearly modules, those are the goals that you're going to have on the NPI tabs. You're going to say, my goal, the baseline data was 85%, our goal was 87%, we got 86.7%. And then the next year, our baseline was 86.7%, our goal for the year was 89%, we got to 89.3%. And then at the last submission, when you have reached that maturity phase, that's when you're going to go back to your ultimate goal and list that on the NPI tab. Our baseline was 85%, our goal was 95%, and we reached 95.3% in the 5 years or the 10 years that this was being implemented. So I thought that was an interesting way to take it, but that's what NASCAS will be recommending. They've got a data task force that's working on how to report on NPI. So this has not been made official, but hopefully will be in the next couple of months. And then I just wanted to throw in here that I made a lot of comments that Something that's been submitted for Module 3 might be a better fit for Module 4, or maybe even Module 2, either by me or by OCS. And I just want to throw out that is okay. That is not me or OCS stating that your work is bad or that it's less than, or shaming your agency for not doing community level work or reducing your funding for not doing community level work. The whole point for Module 3 is just to capture work that is already being done that can't be captured in Module 3. If your work can be captured in Module 4, that work that can't already be captured in Module 4. If work that you're doing can be captured in Module 4, that's awesome. Just go ahead and capture it there. Don't try to rework it so that it fits in Module 3. And then I also wanted to point out, this was something that was mentioned at the conference in February, which was interesting, is that you might have a community transformation that you're a part of that might not fit Module, that might not fit Module 3. And also, again, that's okay. An example of this would be if you're doing like a public awareness campaign. It can be really hard to show that the actions you're taking as a part of that public awareness are having a community-wide impact versus any other strategies that are being implemented or anything else that's going on. That's something that's just so incredibly difficult to measure. And so again, might not be worth trying to fit it into a Module 3. And again, that's fine. We want to try and get as much of your work captured in Modules 2 through 4, but some of it just might not fit. And again, that's okay. So I just don't want anyone to be freaking out if they see a comment from me or from OCS that, this doesn't fit, or it needs additional information in order to be submitted that you just don't have. That's fine. Maybe we just don't submit it this year, or we don't ever submit it. And again, that's okay. So next steps, probably early next week, you will get comments from me from OCS on your 2018 submissions, and then from me on your community action plans, and then from me on your 2019 submissions. And in those comments, I will provide basically required actions. For some of you, I made pretty explicit note that if you do not provide the updated information that either I or OCS is requesting, I am not going to submit it as a Module 3. And that is a part that goes back to the Dear Colleague letter where there's extra emphasis on state review. Basically, OCS has made it very clear that they don't want another 800 or 900 submissions this year, that they expect the states to be a little bit more critical in our review of modules so that when things get to OCS, it's a little bit more clearly defined, that submissions are community level initiatives and that they maybe only need 1 or 2 small things updated. So I'm going to follow that. I will be pretty cut and dry. If I've asked for additional information and you are not able to provide it, I'm just not going to submit it as a part of the annual report. Now, you can come back and say, hey, I don't think you really understand what we're doing. The information that you're asking for doesn't make sense, which is fine. It could just be I don't understand what you're doing. But probably in that case, then you still need to make a change to make it clear what you're doing and provide any additional information that can help illustrate that. Yeah, so then after that, my hope, depending on what's going on with our state and with our country, is by the end of April, so by around April 27th, if you can get those comments back, those new submissions back to me, and then in May, I want to send those over to NASCAS and have them do a review and really try to get our submissions looking good before we send them on to OCS. Right now, the end date for sending to OCS is at the end of June. I'm hoping that we can have our submission done by and that includes modules 2 and 4. I'm hoping that we can have everything done by mid-June. So that's why I'm trying to keep things rolling with this module 3. But yeah, so hopefully next week you should, early next week, you should get next steps from me with comments and questions. Now, does anyone have any questions at this point? The only questions I saw during the presentation were comments about audio not working. And again, I'm really sorry about that, guys. But hopefully it was caught as this is getting recorded, and I'll post the recording to our website. Hopefully, if not by the end of this week, early next week. But yeah, so as soon as, probably by the end of today, I'll have the video ready to go. and it just might take a couple of days to get onto our website. So any other questions? Have I scared off anyone? Hopefully not. I think Module 3 is very important. I think a lot of the initiatives that are being submitted are great fits for Module 3, and I'm very excited to submit them to OCS. I think we just need to work on the details. Okay. Oh, and some people's audio was working great. Awesome. That makes me feel better. So if some people didn't have any audio issues, that hopefully means that the recording was able to catch everything. So if you did have audio issues, hopefully you'll be able to listen back to this at a later date. Thank you for letting me know. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll go ahead and end this. So I want to thank you all for sticking through me rambling for the last 55 minutes. I know that's not ever a very fun activity, but look for an email from me in the next hour or so. I'll go ahead and send you these slides so that you have them to review pretty quickly. And then, like I said, early next week for comments on your 2019 submissions. If you have any questions in the meantime, any concerns, or just want to talk about this a little bit more in depth with your particular initiatives, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to set up some time to talk through that with you. All right, well, if nothing else, I will go ahead and end this. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everyone. And I'm sure we'll be talking to most of you very soon. Bye, guys.